Off you go.
Yeah. Okay, we're live now. Okay, right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the November Derby Homes board meeting. First of all, I'd like to officially welcome Taryn and Michael to their first proper board meeting in their interim positions. It's taken two of them to replace David.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we've had apologies from Alan Graves, and Jen, you sent apologies. You'll be possibly leaving early. Late items, we have two. One which has been circulated, which is in the confidential section, so I'll take that as B7. And there's also a very late one which Michael is doing verbally immediately after that, also confidential, right. B8. Declarations of interest, anything other than the usual? No. I've one announcement from the chair. As from the last board meeting, myself, Bob and Lucy did conduct a mid-year review of Maria's targets. We are recommending that we've agreed that substantial progress was being made on all targets, and we'd report this to the board. A copy of the evidence that Maria's submitted will be, Jackie will be circulated after the meeting. Any statements from members of the board? No? Okay. No questions from the public. So we'll move on to item 7, audit feedback. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. The Audit Committee met on the 18th of October. We started off with a late item, explaining that the external auditors BDO had advised Derby Homes that they will not be able to undertake the 2021-2022 audit. And after discussion, the committee agreed a process to try to be able to appoint new external auditors at the February Audit Committee. There is an update on this matter in item A5 on our agenda tonight. The committee considered the report on from the internal auditors on how audit assignments and recommendations were progressing as at October 2021. During discussion, the internal auditors advised that auditors are experiencing difficulties in getting essential information from Derby City Council IT team, which has resulted in the delayed completion of some audit work. It also emerged during discussion that Derby Homes are experiencing some lack of response from DCC IT team 2. So after considerable discussion, the committee agreed that it should be formally noted in the minutes that the Audit Committee is very disappointed with the responsiveness of Derby City Council's IT team to internal audit requests, and requests that a senior member of Derby Homes staff informally contacts a senior member of staff at Derby City Council to discuss this. The committee also agreed that should senior staff fail to produce an adequate response from Derby City Council, the Audit Committee will request that someone senior from the Council attends a future Audit Committee meeting to discuss and explain. The committee considered a report on health and safety compliance update and how compliance was progressing as at October 2021 and noted progress. The committee considered the annual fraud plan and corporate anti-fraud policy and agreed no changes to the current corporate anti-fraud policy and procedures are required other than some wording adjustments in the policy. The committee considered a review of the depreciation policy for non-property assets held by Derby Homes and recommended to the board to continue the existing depreciation policy. The committee considered the review of the whistleblowing policy and agreed to recommend that the board approves the updated whistleblowing policy. And last but by no means least, the committee noted that its October meeting was David Entercott's last appearance at the committee, and members of the committee warmly thanked David for his work and helped the committee over the many years he has assisted them. And that concludes the Audit Committee report, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. I've got two hands up, Maria first and then Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just want to respond on the issues that Audit Committee raised with the Council's IT response. David Endicott advised me of the discussion that the committee had the very next day, and we contacted the director responsible at the council, and I'm sure the board will be reassured to hear that we got an incredibly prompt response. There was an apology from the director. I must say personally, I did have some sympathies with them, because our IT department within the council have had an incredibly busy year rolling out all sorts of technology that has kept essential services rolling through the pandemic. And I think perhaps we as an organisation could have offered a little bit more to Audit Committee in terms of an explanation for delay. But anyway, that put aside, we've had very positive conversations. There has been some personnel changes, which again has impacted a little bit. But I'm absolutely reassured with the response that the service will be restored, and they're fully committed to catching up on the audit recommendations.
Thank you, Maria. Rachel, I think you want to come in on the same thing.
Of course, and Maria said obviously really helpful comments, and leave that there. That's really good. All I would just say is that in light of the fact we've signed a partnership agreement between the two organisations and we work together collaboratively, I would have expected a more nuanced understanding of the difficulties on both sides about those issues, rather than simply an expectation that the council had done something wrong there. I'm sure, as Maria has explained, there's always a story behind, isn't there? Some of the context and the context and the reality. So yeah, made that point, but that's fine. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Well, thank you, Rachel. And
could I just make the point, Chair, just in response, that the role of the Audit Committee is to deal with audit, and in many cases where the Audit Committee has to consider things, there are all sorts of fringe reasons why things have not happened. But the role of the Audit Committee is to get audit done, and if it's not being done, to raise that as an issue to be resolved. And that's why it's been raised in the minutes of the Audit Committee and mentioned here tonight, Chair. Okay,
well, thank you. Well, I think you might be more reassured by the responses that you've received.
Yes, I'm very happy to hear what's been said.
Okay, right, thank you. Any further questions or comments to Ian? In that case, Jan, over to you for governance.
Thank you, Chair. So the Governance Committee met on the 4th of November. We had 4 agenda items. The first was the remuneration of board members, and we had a really good discussion around that. There was the paper that was presented gave 4 different options. That you will recall that the allowances for board members has actually been last reviewed at Governance Committee in April 2019, and at that time we agreed that it would be frozen in line with the council's policy as they were looking at it. So the paper told us that the council had approved an increase in allowances from July 2021, and so there were 4 options. The committee discussed the options, and as I say, it was quite a sort of in-depth discussion, really, with some people being in favour of a freeze because of the difficulties that residents are feeling at the moment, and perception that if we increased our allowances, it didn't feel right. On the other hand, it was also recognised that we are now in a partnership agreement with the council, and that really the allowances for board members should sit and be linked to the council members' pay allowances as well. So there was lots of debate, and we actually voted with 2 people abstaining and 3 people in favour of the increase and 2 against. So that it now goes to the council for them to decide whether to accept it, but we are recommending the link to the local government pay awards, and it be backdated to April 2021, similar to the council members' allowances as well. The next agenda item, or the next 2, the board member code of conduct and the board member services agreement are both on the agenda tonight under A13, and the committee just recommended a few slight changes to wording of that, as you'll see when we come on to them. And the last agenda item was the rule of 85 declined applications, and the committee just asked in the future if we could have any ones that have been approved as well as those that have been declined, so we get the full picture.
Okay, well,
yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jeanne. Any questions, comments to Jeanne? Okay. Just before we move on, welcome Roy to the meeting, join us, and I think Shiraz will welcome you back. I think you've resolved your technical difficulties.
Sorry, excuse me, Chair, I did have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was fiddling about with buttons. Shan, when you talk about allowances for board members, I know that there's allowances for chairs and vice chairs, but we have other categories of board membership as well. Is there allowances for some and not for others?
No, it was for the chairs and
okay.
So for the chairs of the committees and the chairs, the chair of the main board and operation, yeah, and the 2 vice chairs for the main board.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Jen, if I could just clarify that for you, Jen, even though somebody else says got 2 roles within the board, for example, operational board and vice chair, you still only get 1 allowance.
No, Bob, I am aware of that. It's a bit of a difficult thing, and I didn't want to appear to be kind of trying to butter my own bread, but we have tenant and independent board members, and in the spirit of the work we're trying to do of co-production, quite often people who come from a lived experience rather than perhaps their professional background as an independent board member tend to get far less financial recognition and remuneration for the time that they spend, even though they might be bringing equivalent skills. And I know it would have left us in a sticky situation, because obviously there's some people might argue tenant board members had you know, that they would, I don't know, it would encourage people to come for the wrong reasons, but it was just sometimes, you know, if we were in that situation, I thought it would have needed talking about, but we're not, so don't worry about it. Thank you.
Jen, it's maybe something that we could ask for to be looked at further, because it was kind of in the papers. Yeah. It was an option, but we didn't actually discuss it. There was lots of sort of discussion around whether we should even have the increase in the allowance for the current ones. But actually, I agree with every point that you've said, and it is maybe something we ought to, we should have more of a discussion about.
I'm happy actually to have expenses covered, and I think that's perfectly right. And I understand the need for the board's chair and vice chair because of the extra work that they do through the nature of their roles. But as I said, I just wasn't aware of a stipend or an allowance for an independent board member or other categories we might have, and just wanted to clarify we didn't have some, you know, different levels of recognition of people's time and skills. That was all.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. If we then could move on to the minutes of the September meeting, if we could look at them first for accuracy, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11. Nobody said anything, so I can take that as a true record and I'll sign them accordingly. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Going back again for any matters arising which aren't going to be covered elsewhere. Anything on page 1 or 2? On page 3, 21,144. Claire, I think you're going to update something on the.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to update in terms of the meeting with Jen in relation to the digital strategy, that has gone ahead. We had a really interesting hour. I think Jen challenged us for about 58 minutes of that hour, which was really, really, really useful. Gave us a lot to think about, and we have scheduled meetings with Jen from January for every couple of months. She's going to help us out. I think we're appointing her as the board champion for digital, and she's going to help us progress through our digital strategy next year. So thanks very much, Jen.
Right.
Wow.
Jen, you want to add to that?
No, other than to say I'm going to be a hard taskmaster, basically. You know, there's, you know, we're willing to work in the same direction, but you know, it's it's nice working with people who have got open minds, basically, you know, and can take you know, at all levels of the organisation, feedback in good humour and how it was intended, and to actually progress forwards for the sake of the organisation. You know, it's Derby Homes is lovely because there's no egos.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Page 4, anything? Page 5, 6, page 7 again, you, Claire. Any updates on CareLink?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So two bits of update. One is we have been able to establish that the digitisation of the digital telephone exchanges is not impacting on the analogue CareLink units that we have put in place in phase 1 of the CareLink programme. But in terms of the longevity of moving to digital, we have made the decision now for the second tranche of the CareLink installations to be digital units, and we are in the process of raising those orders with our contractor to get those installations starting again in the new year.
Yes, Bob.
Claire, can I just pick up on that? If some are not digital, what's going to happen to those who've got non-digital connections?
So over time, they will be upgraded to digital, but there is nothing in the pipeline until at least 2025
Right.
that should mean that those analog kits don't work effectively. So I think the decision that we've taken to put digital in the second phase is really a preventative one as we get the rollout gets nearer and nearer to 2025. But all of the analog kits will be upgraded as their life cycle comes to an end, and sooner if the digitisation does in fact take place in 2025.
Yeah, because that's heartening, because that's thinking ahead, using Jen's thing about digital. You know, it's good to see that we're now using digital. And it was in the news today, wasn't it, about going digital, and there's a big thing about people with, you know, older people, how it's going to affect them. So I welcome that statement, and thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Claire. Page 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, thank you. Outstanding actions, A3. Well, the first outstanding action is next month, and the second one we've already talked about. So we can move on to you, Maria, your report.
Yep, thank you, Chair. First of all, Ian, thank you, because you indicated that from reading the report, I think you got a good grasp of what we had been doing on the away day, even though you weren't able to join us. Lucy, did you want to come in on something?
Yeah, I was just too slow at picking up on the outstanding actions.
Okay.
that I think that David might have had his last meeting, so the social value strategy might not be in action by him.
Yeah, okay.
And that might need updating.
Is it you, Karen?
One of us
will pick it. Either Karen or Michael. They will sort it out there, yes.
That's all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. So yeah, back to the report, which is really a review of the board away day that we held. Certainly, I don't want to go back having the same discussions that we had on Saturday, as positive and productive as they were. Let's park it where it is. I think for me, though, that the most positive thing that came out on Saturday was an absolute shared view around our commitment to working in partnership. And that's partnerships with the council, with other agencies, but most importantly, with the people that live in our city, because that is why we're here. That is why we deliver our services. So I honestly think we've got some really exciting times ahead. Cultural change is going to be probably one of the hardest challenges. Working with people is always difficult to predict, but we are going to be looking at some training rollout in January of next year. And I'd actually be really keen to do a session with board members on restorative practice and the different way of working, so that you all get a flavour of exactly how we're trying to move our culture. We had good discussion around neighbourhood boards, and Claire will touch on that in her report as well, because she goes into a little bit more detail about the focusing in on some micro areas where we want to start actually doing things differently rather than talking about things differently. But going on to page 3 of the report, I think this really is the board members' kind of biggest priority now going forward. And that is absolutely getting to grips with the requirements on you as a board and the relationship that you have within the ALMO and the relationship with the council in the new regulatory framework. And Chloe Fletcher came along, and I'm sure you'll all agree with me, gave us an absolutely superb overview of the whole landscape that we're working towards. As we move forward, what I intend to do is to start bringing a new report each time we meet, and the first one will be in January, and it will contain a lot of information that you might ordinarily have thought of as rather operational. But the chair made a really good comment to me earlier and said, Maria, we have to know as a board what are the right questions to be asking. And I think the only way that board members can actually get to the right questions, get the right level of understanding in terms of what this organisation is delivering and the areas that we perhaps want to improve on, by me bringing you more information around the operational outcomes that we seek to achieve. So January will be the first report, and it will be a review of, a self-assessment against the consumer standards. I can't actually believe that it was almost 2 years ago that we did the first assessment. Time has gone, it's just gone nowhere. But we as a senior management team are reviewing that now. We've been involving wider managers, and in January we'll bring something to you that certainly Jan will find very familiar, because it will look very much like a document you may have seen when we were judging ourselves against key lines of inquiries many years ago, under the Audit Commission. It will be a confidential report, because it will be about the areas that we as an organisation want to improve on. And I hope that that will make you as board members feel confident that you are getting the information that you need. It will give us the opportunity to discuss it, and it'll give the board the opportunity to intervene if you feel it necessary. At the same time, I am going to be working with my colleagues in the council I'll be leading on a piece of work where Derby Homes and the council assess its relationship in terms of meeting the regulatory requirements, because I think you're all aware the relationship between the regulator will be with the council. But I respect that the council actually employ us to do their doing and do it in a good way. So my particular wish is that we will make sure that the council have the evidence and the assurance and are given regular overviews and updates from us, so that it doesn't become another layer that they have to worry about. Rachel and I have discussed it together previously, and we're both satisfied that with effective partnership working, we can have a thin client relationship between the two organisations and just work collaboratively on meeting the standards, and where we can, exceeding the standards. So again, we'll bring progress on that in January. I know you didn't have much time, but the publication date was a little out of my control. I did forward yesterday the link to the NFA and CWAG joint report, which I'm quite precious about this report because I was involved in it being put together. I think it's a superb piece of work, and I'm proposing that we do use the action plan within that report as the template for measuring the strength of our relationship. So happy to discuss the report with any board members outside of this meeting. Absolutely appreciate that you probably only had time to scan the exec summary in the time that you've had it, but please do take the time to have a look at it, because it's a really informative document. That's all I was going to say, Mike.
Okay. Any questions, any comments to Maria? Apart from just reaffirming exactly what she just said about the little bit of homework that you've given us to do before the January meeting to make sure we're all okay with that excellent report.
Yeah, and obviously, Chair, by all means, any board members that want to talk through any areas of regulation or the relationship between an ALMO and its council as contained in that report, just reach out to me. We can arrange a conversation. And I just want to say we welcome the challenge. And there was a link came out yesterday, Jen, on email for all board members. I'll circulate it again in the notes now.
Okay, right, thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, over to you then, Michael. A5 finance update.
Thank you, Chair. There's no particular recommendations in this update, so I was just going to go straight to any questions on any issues anybody may have after reading through the report.
And I can't see any hands being raised, so I assume
Lucy.
Lucy, sorry, Lucy.
No longer muted. Under 4.6, we talked about the need to buy odd diesel vans. I'm not sure we really want odd ones. I want like sort of ordinary ones, but I just wondered whether we bought new or second-hand, because if we know that we're going to be getting rid of them progressively, and we do a fairly low mileage ourselves, it might be something which we could buy second-hand, properly approval routes, and I suspect we don't.
It's a combination, to be honest. most of the vans that we do buy are brand new, because the intention is to run them on for, well, at least 7 years, but in reality 10, 12, maybe 15 years. We have in the past bought some second-hand vans, but those are ones used on our public buildings contract that we run for Derby City Council, because at the time it wasn't certain how long that contract would continue for. So it works out cheaper in the longer run to buy new and run them on for a longer period of time. But if a contract was, if it was a short-term contract related to capital works or something like that, then we would consider second-hand vans, and then potentially, if necessary, sell the vans on if they became spare.
Could we, Chair, consider that issue as part of the review of going to electric vans and the appropriateness of buying second-hand in the interim?
I think we had a very good discussion about vans on Monday, and I think, yeah, a number of points that we can throw that all into any further discussions. Yeah, and Sean's in agreement with that. Yes.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Definitely.
Any other questions to Michael?
No.
In that case, we'll move on. Sean.
Great. Thanks, Chair. Michael, I like your style with your report there. So
we weren't used to that from David, were we?
I'll kind of do a bit of a hybrid between the two. I will take you through, briefly, some of the points that I've got on my report. There's only one recommendation that I've got, which is really in tune with what we talked about at the away day, which is working together with the City Council and combining our efforts, in particular around climate change. But you'll have all had access to the appendix and the update new build, and that'll give you the detail in terms of the progress that we've got on each particular scheme. Just to mention a few key points from that, and that's that we're currently on site at Berwick Avenue, Cumming Street and Chesapeake through the in-house new build team. And for anyone attending the operational board, you'll get further details in terms of the programme that we've set for those sites as well. So we're being very clear that for new sites, we've got a defined programme, and we measure ourselves against each milestone of that programme to make sure we keep on track. And that's really from my experience of post-COVID, it taking what seems like forever to finish some of those old sites, that we've seen the back of now, that are now being completed. So being a bit disciplined about timeframes. Also, in terms of development team update, whilst we're on site through the in-house new build team on the sites that I just referred to there, we've got some medium to larger scale sites that have now got planning approvals for, that we need to procure main contractors for. So we're currently in the process of finishing the details on our employers' requirements, and that's refining our specification. And that's not just from an eco point of view. We're making sure that we're capturing all of the details there, but also all the technical arrangements and the specification details on kitchens and bathrooms and components. We're making sure that we're updating that document because that'll effectively be our shopping list when we send that information out to main contractors for them to price against. Now, we're looking to develop long-term relationships with developers and main contractors for us to be able to issue them a series of sites in turn, as opposed to having to re-procure every individual site, one at a time. We feel that'll deliver better value for money and give us a better guarantee through the supply chain. So we're currently working with a consultant in terms of wrapping up those details and enabling us then to have a bit more confidence on the scale and pace at which we can deliver. And this is something that we're talking a lot to the council about, making sure that we've got that scale and pace integrated into what we're doing and that we're geared up for that. That's kind of the update on new build. Now, in terms of an update on decarbonisation work, now since the last board meeting, we've held our first staff decarbonisation forum meeting. It was well attended by a group of really enthusiastic staff, and we had a really good first meeting, although much of it was scene setting. We've agreed that we're going to meet again before the Christmas break to divvy up and allocate different parts of our decarbonisation challenge to subgroups within that team. And that kind of mirrors the way the council are working at their officer group level with some of the particular issues that they're liaising on. And there's every chance that our subgroups will tie up with some of the council subgroups as well to continue this theme of combining our efforts. Now, I suppose moving on from that, effectively in terms of what we're doing with the council, I've been involved in a number of different meetings to combine the expertise between the council and Derby Homes. And the first one was the work that reports up to the Climate Change Commission that's been set up by the City Council, and this is chaired by Chris Bussell from the university, and that has a series of action hubs associated to it, one of which is a housing action hub, and I've been chairing that hub now for about 8 or 9 months in total. We've had a series of meetings, and we've even had a site visit actually. So we've been initially looking at a lot of data in terms of identifying which areas of the city that we need to target, which are the worst first, where's the low-hanging fruit. And we've now started to develop from analysing data to pulling together an action plan to make sure that we're effectively, as an organisation, as a city council and an ALMO, lining all of our ducks up in a row to be able to benefit from future grant funding that might come down the track, or look at innovative ways of being able to fund decarbonisation work to housing across all sectors within the city. So that's particularly interesting, and it's great to see some of that work already underway through the Green Homes grant funding that we've got around the Mackworth area. And as I mentioned here, we've got our fingers crossed for the bid that we've made to the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, and we're hoping to find out the result of that bid just before the Christmas break. So that's great around housing. I've also been attending the Chief Exec's Officer Working Group at the City Council, and that group's decided to do the same and set up a number of subgroups, and I've been asked to take a lead on the adaptation group in this particular aspect, and this is about the City Council and the ALMO adapting to the inevitable impacts of climate change. So me being an eternal optimist, it's a bit of a strange group for me to be looking after, but I can come at it from a slightly different angle, and I think this will give us the chance to understand how the impact of climate change can disproportionately affect certain groups. And from a really positive point of view, I think it's going to give me the chance to work with the council to find different methods of being able to adapt our style of new build to be able to accommodate the risks that invariably will come down. I was going to say down the river then, because that's where most of it will probably happen. But you know, down the line, as it were, you know, in terms of the impacts of climate change. And I've got my first subgroup meeting for that next week, and I've already held a really useful session with the Environment Agency, and we're looking to try and replicate some work across the region in a very similar way to the way they've successfully managed to do that in the West Midlands. So there's some interesting work that we're doing there. Now, the reason for talking about all this joint work in this area, and if you think about us as an ALMO, we manage the council's housing stock, we provide that service from council buildings, we work with the council to manage our fleet, we even buy our gas and electric through a joint arrangement with the City Council. So it absolutely makes sense for us to work together. So we had got our own standalone environmental policy that was due to come back to the board for a review. And I'll be honest with you, that was very much based on the council's environmental policy quite a number of years ago. The council are currently updating not just their environmental policy, but pulling together a really detailed climate action plan, which we're very much part of. In fact, our carbon emissions are part and parcel of that document that I'm working very closely with the council on. So what I'm here to ask the board for tonight is for us to continue this partnership approach with the council, and for us to co-adopt a very similar, even if I need to Derby Homesify it, a very similar environmental policy that marries up with the partnership working that we're doing with the council. So that's the main reason for kind of talking about all this partnership work, but also asking the board to agree to extend that to potentially adopting a policy that lines up with the city councils. So I'm happy to take questions on that particular issue before I just move on to the final point, which is compliance update. Jen.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Jen.
Yes. So it was a question, Sean, regarding the decarbonisation work more generally that you've been discussing with us over the last few updates. So if you remember, I think it was the board meeting before last, you talked about the fact that in our stock there was only about 400 houses which had energy efficiency ratings, I think, of C or below. And Ian suggested I go away and had a look at the government's like database of it, which I did.
Yep.
Now, I sat down and did some number crunching, and just on the two estates, the one where I used to live, where we owned a private house, and the one where we live as Derby Homes tenants, even accounting for a 30% private occupancy, those two estates still had nearly 200 houses on them, according to the government's website, which had energy efficiency ratings below what you said you were at. Now, with respect of the 12,000 or so houses that we have, I can't believe of the 400, 2 would just be on the 2 estates where I would live. And the only thing that I could think of was that if our energy efficiency certificates had been issued a number of years ago, and the system you were using kind of took a snapshot of the latest update of work, you know, so if a certificate had been issued 5 years ago and then we'd done work on the estate to bring it up, that was a reason I thought between what the government's website was telling me and what you were telling me. But I do still want to put a polite challenge out to you to make sure that the data we are using is accurate, basically, because if it's not, we're going to be caught with our pants down and we're going to be looking really daft, particularly with all this partnership work that you're doing. So that was it, basically. You know, you said it was 400 houses, and I went away and I had a look, and on the 2 estates I've lived on, according to the government website, there's 200-ish houses, even with a 30% private occupancy rate for both of the estates in Allenton and here where I live in Sunny Hill is probably very generous. So, you know, that's just something. I did what was suggested, and my it kind of just doesn't stack up. So it would be really helpful maybe on the next board meeting to have a clarification about how you're reaching that thing of 400 and how your software does it, between what the government website's saying in the energy certificate ratings available publicly, and then maybe what your software is spitting out.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that, Jen, because that will give the board hopefully some real enlightenment around the details that we capture on our system and how that compares with the details that's less detailed that people use for a SAP rating or the EPC rating that you check in on the government's website. But yeah, I'm really interested in doing that with you. And if you're happy, I'd like to maybe spend a little bit of time with you between now and the next meeting, just go through some of that detail, just so we can kind of unfurl that and understand that issue. Because it's very similar to work that we've done through the Housing Action Hub. We've looked at over 90,000 EPCs to give us a chance to understand what's happening in the city, you know, to spot those areas that really do need this intervention. But the data that we've got on our asset management system is far in advance of the sort of detail that you'll get when you carry out a SAP or an EPC rating. So, for example, we've got the separate rating on boilers. All that detail goes into the system. So I'm really confident with that system, and I'm more than happy to talk in more detail about that to convince you and the rest of the board, you know, that it's the right system that gives us the right sort of detail and the right answers.
Could I just, there was actually one other thing I wanted to propose towards decarbonisation, but every 2 months we get sent a huge pile of paper out with printing on it, all right? And lots of us have paperless billing these days. I personally would be really happy to have paperless board minutes and reports, or if I take responsibility, in as much as, you know, I've then got confidential information around my house that I have to dispose of responsibly. But I'd also like to propose that if board members are happy to go paperless, we could do so as well, because there's probably a good 500-page sheaf of paper going out. And, you know, when you add the operational board and the governance board into that, it's a lot of stuff that's just going into the shredder.
Well, I'm sorry, Jen, I would prefer to keep it as it is. I work with paper.
But Bob, I don't think Jen is suggesting that you've been forced to it. Like,
it's whoever wants it, that's it. I'm just saying, give us the option. That's all, Bob. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Jen, it's lovely to have somebody else saying that they want some paperless board stuff. I've been saying for 3-4 years about looking at different systems. There's lots of systems out there that you can use as a board, where you can have the papers on it, that you can annotate it, that you can go back and see. So you've referred to in this meeting today to the discussions we had about EPCs. If we'd have got that system would have been able to have gone straight back to that meeting and looked at what exactly was said. And, you know, and it helps with the challenges. So I know that we've been looking at some sort of systems that the council uses, but and I raise it every sort of 6 months or so to say, where are we at with this? Because it, as well as the kind of like the amount of paper, it's actually quite a lot of work for the the teams putting all the papers together as well, and you know, and then sending it out through the post and whatever. But being able to annotate, so you can kind of like it's just like having your papers, but on a system where you can annotate it, and as I say, and then you can go back as well. I also wanted to come in on your challenge about the EPC thing. I think that it was so Maria had put a really good challenge, and I would like to kind of have some more information back to the board as well. So not just Sean speaking to you outside of the meeting. I think we would like to see it, because you've gone away and done some of that on the groundwork to say these figures don't actually make sense. It doesn't feel right. And so I would kind of like that to come back to the board to see why the figures are sort of showing different. If they are showing different on the government website, well, we shouldn't really be having two different sets of figures. So, so I just wanted to sort of to agree with you on both points.
I've got Lucy and Maria, but I think Taryn just wanted to make a point about paperless things.
Thank you, Chair. We have just recently, jointly with the council, got the My CMIS app, and that does exactly what you are discussing. So myself, David and Michael are testing it, and that if it works for us, we will be rolling it out in the new year. But it's something we've jointly procured with the council as part of CMIS. So it's here, it's being tested.
I don't mind testing it as well. I'm sure Jen wouldn't mind.
I was going to ask if I'm involved in digital, could I get a copy as well, please?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you. Lucy.
Yeah, well, I was going to start by saying that the council forced all its councillors to go paperless at the start of COVID. So we've not had any standard papers being sent out on paper for the last year and a half and a bit. It's taken a bit of a while for some people to get used to it, and I think some people, particularly chairs of meetings, tend to print stuff off, at least some of it. But it has happened, so it is quite practical for it to happen here too, if people so desire. And I think we included in some of our policy changes away from the reference to specifically to paper, but to reports in some of the paperwork we did time before last, I think. So the other thing I was going to mention is this anomaly between what we think our housing stock's energy efficiency is and what it is on the national website. And I think that we need to not just sit back and compare, but it's actually a bad news story if anybody goes and looks at our estates and sees how bad they are. So I think we need to push back against whoever is managing that website. If we have the evidence that our properties are properly insulated and energy efficient, we need to tell whoever looks after that website that it is out of date and work out how we can get them to update it.
I think, Lucy, I was just going to say, I think it's just every time a certificate is issued, which tends to just be when a new tenant moves into a property, it automatically gets updated on the government's website. And if a tenant wants one updated, they can request it. But as a habit, because a lot of them actually are out of date, they only last like 3 or 5 years. So I think that's what's happening. It's just a case of that we've been doing work, but we haven't been doing the recertification process. But you know, as you say, if we're doing all of this climate work and we've got a PR thread about it, and then somebody goes and has a look on the website, you're right, it's not cogent with one another. There's no coherency there. Yeah,
we need to update it.
Yeah, I mean, we have got a huge number of owner occupiers that live across our estates that have not been able to afford or deliver some of the environmental improvements that we've delivered across the stock. And I'll be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why we're targeting some of the green homes grant funding, you know, those particular individuals. You know, we are targeting those uninsulated Wimpy 05 properties in Mackworth in the private sector to try and enable owner occupiers to achieve a similar level of energy efficiency. But I'm more than happy to bring more detail back on this, because I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation to compare what we've got on our very detailed live system and see how that compares with some of the EPCs that are issued, and just understand that difference. I'm as intrigued as everyone at the meeting is, to be fair, about wanting to get stuck into that process. So it's a really positive exercise, actually. So thanks for raising it.
Maria, you had your hand up and it's gone down again, do you?
No, it's fine. Taryn covered what I was going to say.
Okay, right. Shiraz.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Very quickly, Lucy mentioned about councillors not having paper sent to them. Well, we haven't had paper sent to us for, well, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years. I think they normally leave them in the councillors' pigeonholes in the respective party rooms. But, you know, I'm all for cutting down on hard copies and whatever, but there are some people that genuinely need it, me included, and a few other councillors who ask for hard copies because of a medical condition. So I think, you know, sort of Jen's absolutely right, and everybody else is, that we should try and cut down on it. But equally, it's a case, if somebody wants them, then we should you know, sort of give it to them. We shouldn't send them out to everybody, but there's no harm in asking who wants a hard copy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Bob was saying, Shiraz, that it's we need to look at a policy, but initially, at least, it's an option. Yeah. Yes, Bob.
And then, like I say, just on the back of that, and I think Jackie will be able to, there's some members of the operational board where paperless wouldn't work for them. So we'd be mindful there are people out there who do, for various reasons, would be medical accountant or they haven't got a computer. Be mindful there will be a small niche. I'm not anti-progress. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not anti-progress. I'm not, you know, paper. I'm one of these people that works better with paper. And I know it's old-fashioned as everything else. But I've got my computer here tonight, so to look at the reports. But I just think we have to be mindful of other people, particularly in the operational board.
Okay. Maria, your hand's gone up again.
Unmute. Chair, what I'd like to suggest is that we actually minute it, that the board have approved that we will approach all members of boards and committees and give them the option. And from the new year, that will be our New Year's resolution.
I'm even happy to come to London Road and pick them up to save the postage cost.
You don't have to do that because I think your own carbon emissions in picking them up, Bob.
Oh, nice one. Nicely turned around. I like it.
Unless you start cycling like me.
Yeah.
I'll go with Maria.
Okay, so
okay,
we'll do
I think that's a very sensible suggestion. Right, Sean, I think, can we go back to you then for compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the final, but probably one of the most important parts of the report is the update on compliance, which is shown on Appendix 2. You'll be pleased to hear that we're 100% compliant in all 6 areas there. And I'm really pleased, as you look at the commentary, that we're seeing an ever-reducing number of properties that are in the process of gaining access to as well on gas servicing and electrical inspections. So 15 and 13 respectively are the only ones that we've made, 3, 4, 5 attempts at getting in. We know precisely where we are with every single one of those, and we will eventually gain access to them all. So it's good to see that number reducing.
Thank you, Sean. Any comments on that bit of Sean's report?
I could just say, Sean, now that we get that, the comments in the columns, it's so much better than, you can see exactly what's going on. I think the comment bit is really good.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. But there's kind of an extra column being added in as well that shows you the percentage of live certificates as well. That covers those, certainly those top 2 areas of our work there. So yeah, just gives a bit more detail. And again, more details discussed on these areas at operational boards, by my heads of service, so they give even further detail there.
Okay, right. Thank you, Sean. We can move on then to Claire, A7.
Thank you, Chair. So there are 3 areas that I'm updating the board on in my report. The first is some additional grant support for vulnerable renters. This is additional grant through the Homeless Prevention Grant through DLUC, and is a additional grant that we need to spend by the 31st of March, focused on supporting people in the private rented sector and preventing them from homelessness. As I say, it has to be spent by the end of the year. Our grant allocation is 206,000. We weren't expecting it, so we have had to take some guidance from DLUC quite quickly in terms of what we might do in terms of spending this money. And they've been quite helpful in clarifying that if we struggle to spend all of this allocation in the private sector, we can use it also in relation to social housing, where there have been COVID arrears primarily built up during the COVID period. But their intention is really that this money is directed to the private sector. So we are working through getting that money out the door, and are confident that we will do that by the end of the year. Lucy, you've got a question. Do you want? Yeah. Shall I go all the way through? Or do you want to pick that one up now?
It was on this one, and it was specifically, how are we spending it? Is it just in advice, or can it be to provide deposits for people to move, or is it to remove arrears that they'd otherwise be thrown out? So it's a bit more specific.
Yeah, so it's targeted at people who are at risk of homelessness as a result of COVID-related arrears in the private sector. They're quite specific about that. What they don't want is the money to be spent on temporary accommodation. This is very much about staving off homelessness actually occurring. So it can be used to pay for arrears. And I think the conversation that we are having, and I think other local authorities have been having as well, is to what extent. So, how much arrears might we pay off? And certainly in Derby, we have a history of recharging back any incentives that we give to tenants at a rate of 50%. So we've been having those conversations as to whether that's acceptable in terms of these grant getting this grant out of the door. We can also pay for rents in advance and deposits, which we have previously been paying for through our private rented sector incentive scheme anyway. So this is a booster to that scheme over the winter period, and I think it's primarily to support the private sector as a result of furlough ending and the universal credit uplift ending, and the concerns that may create greater pressures on homelessness. So this is about trying to slow that down in the private sector.
How do people know it's there, and how do they access it?
So in terms of the incentive scheme that we currently operate, people will approach us as either threatened with homelessness or homeless. What we're wanting to do, and again, what we've been talking to the Department of Levelling Up Housing Communities, DLUC, about is putting together a longer term scheme where we can offer grants of up to £500 primarily to people who haven't approached as homeless. So what we need to do more to get further up the preventative path. And in doing that, we need to use different avenues of how people are contacting us. So people might be contacting the council for all sorts of different things, but some of the markers in some of their contacts may mean that we can direct preventative grant to them at an earlier opportunity. We would really love to do that, and also target those people that are contacting Citizens Advice or Derby Help and Advice, those that are on the periphery of needing some help, rather than dealing with people when they get to crisis point, which is quite often when people approach housing options.
What about working through some of the private letting agencies? Is that acceptable?
It is, and we do that already. So that in terms of our private rental sector incentive scheme that we run, we have relationships with a lot of private landlords in the city. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay,
Claire, carry on.
Okay, so the second area to update on was regarding Derby Homes' involvement around the Health and Wellbeing Board development. There's been a couple of sessions where the council are having a look at the Health and Wellbeing Board, which is a statutory board, and refreshing its purpose, its values, and thinking about how it can improve the outcomes as a result of having that board, how it connects with the work around integrated care that's also happening in this space. Derby Homes were invited to come along to the sessions. There have been 2 of them now. And the reason why I'm bringing this, because I think there is a major breakthrough here in terms of discussions around homelessness and housing being seen in those wider determinants of health inequalities. And I think it's something that we've been trying and pushing really hard and what has felt like quite a closed door over a lot of years. And I think the pandemic has really opened everyone's eyes to the fact that we do really need to position how, the impact of not having a home, as well as having a poor home, a cold home, a damp home, an unaffordable home, and how that really impacts on population health inequality. And I'm really hopeful, as a result of being invited to be part of those decisions, that we may end up with a shared seat on the Health and Wellbeing Board between Derby Homes and Strategic Housing within the council, so that between us we get a voice of housing in that room, and also that we position the work that we do around homelessness and, as I say, more broadly safe housing in the arena of health and wellbeing, because we have struggled for a while in terms of the governance around homelessness, and I'm hopeful that we can get stronger governance around the homelessness agenda and the safe housing agenda through that health and wellbeing platform. So I suppose it's one to watch, but I think it will signify quite a shift in being able to, particularly in terms of some of the reliance on grants in the city around homelessness in particular, and moving us to a place that we're more sustainable in years to come, rather than the continued heavy reliance on grants that we currently have. And the last area to update you on is in relation to
Roy's just put his hand up, so I think you might want to come in on that one. Roy?
Just to say, Chair, that the Health and Wellbeing Board and the changes that are coming into place are all linked with new national changes to the health service. And the Health and Wellbeing Board, I've been leading the reviews on this, and those reviews are important because the care system, and that be that National Health Service care or local care that are provided by local carers, so care homes, etc., that this is a new development. It won't be going live fully until April next year. There will be a new integrated care service launched. So the clinical commissioning group, the CCG that we used to hear about, is now changing to an integrated care board, and the health and wellbeing boards in both Derby and Derbyshire will have links into that. The integrated care board will also, for the first time, have links in with the local authority, and that's where the agenda changes. And Claire is quite right to raise the impact that housing is having on health and health inequalities, but that this will be looked at more strategically in future, not just be an add-on to whatever is happening across the city.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Okay, Claire, if you want to move on to your last point.
So my last point is I think we talk a lot about the move towards locality working, and we're often continually asked, what does that actually mean in practice? And I think this is one example of where we're trying to do something tangible to signal the difference that a locality approach can make. And this started off with, every year Derby Homes runs a local customer priorities programme, which is effectively looking at our feedback and our intelligence and insight, and deciding which areas we're going to specifically focus on across our housing stock, with initiatives that are aimed at meeting the needs of what our customers tell us is important to them, most important to them. And this year we tried to do something a little bit different. So we said, well, okay, we normally do that. in the spirit of better together and the spirit of collaborating more with the council, can we overlay some of the data that the council holds together with some of the data that Derby Homes holds? Can we get out into communities and pick up that local intelligence and insight as well? And can we therefore come up with a little bit more scientific approach in terms of where those hotspots are across the city that we might use as pilot areas to do things differently at a local level? So we went about doing that, and that thrown up 14 micro areas, I would say. So I'm talking about few streets, handful of streets that are showing a little bit like a heat map of areas where they have got multiple challenges. And so those 14 areas have been identified, and what we're now moving to do is have either a housing management lead within Derby Homes or a neighbourhood partnership officer lead within the council structures across those 14 to work in those 14 micro neighbourhoods, to get bringing together community leaders, statutory and voluntary partners, and our own council internal services alongside Derby Homes services, galvanising around those particular few streets and working out what we're going to do differently to improve the outcomes in those given areas around specific measurable issues. So we will be launching those wider groups after Christmas. All of the elected members in those areas should have been briefed by now and asked to be part of the work. And in actual fact, it's just to Maria's point earlier about the boards and the board processes, we're really keen that the boards have some ownership around how these groups are brought together and monitored in terms of the action plans that arise as a result of bringing us all together. Because we do need to make sure that we've got leadership of these programmes in these micro areas, and also that we've got a direction of travel that we can track. And the best place I suggest to do that is through the neighbourhood board process. And it's something that we will want to have ongoing conversations with the local elected members about. But it's really just to bring you up to date with what we've done so far, the direction of travel. It is very early and a different way of working, but something that we can practically hold on to as an example of what we're doing differently, what we hope to do differently, and having that intelligence-led approach.
Thank you, Claire. I've got Lucy and then Jen.
Thank you. The phrase locality working resonates with me because it's a phrase that social services have used. Now, you don't seem to mention directly social services who are normally working with specific households, but have they been included on this as well? Because I'm sure that some of those households will be known to social services. Yeah,
so we are planning on going in layers, Lucy. So I think the first grouping, if you like, of council services will be housing management, local area coordination, and neighbourhood management. And then we are working to bring on more services as we get more developed. And I think, you know, everyone loves a pilot. There is something about trying to grow something here in terms of how we do things differently. And my worry is that the more complexity that we put to this initial work, it's got a danger of never getting off the ground.
I'm just concerned that if you don't engage with, if you don't know what social services are already doing in that area, you haven't got the whole picture. And I think, so I think you may not want to ask them to do anything extra, but you need to be mindful that you know at least a bit that they're working with, you know, 4 families in that area or 3 elder people or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Okay.
Jen, then Rachel.
Yeah, so very quickly, I just wanted to say that this is an amazing example of if we could apply this level of insight and nuance using data intelligence across all levels of Derby Homes, this is what we could be achieving. What I did want to say was, though, and it was interesting following on from Lucy's point, the board update says that we're working with the City Council's policy and insight team, and I'm just interested to understand, maybe at a different point, what the GDPR relationship is between us and the council in terms of us being separate or one organisation, and to make sure that tenants are very clear about if we are sharing data, or the council is sharing data as well, particularly if we're kind of doing this kind of pilot. You know, people don't really like it if, for example, local area coordination comes knocking on their door and then they find out that it's happened across the road as well. You know, this can actually cause a lot of, well, negative feeling and distrust, basically, when those things might already be hotspots for this kind of distrust and lack of engagement with, excuse me, stop it. Lack of engagement with families or with households. So yeah, just that, because I thought that we were a separate organisation, and the fact that our data, as in our tenants' data, might be going across to Derby City Council's insight teams, it wasn't something I was aware of as a tenant.
Rachel, you had your hand up, but you may be able to answer that as well.
I mean, we are working on those issues, as Maria has said, but I mean, there are clear benefits and non-benefits about sharing information between agencies to try and support people in the most effective way. So we are working on those issues, and the last thing we want to do is to breach anything that concerns residents. But on the point that was made by Lucy, I mean, we talked about this this is quite a major transformation. We discussed it on the away day for the organisations, so the council and Derby Homes, about how we work, and more than just our organisations, but broader in our public service sort of partnership space, about how we work to support people in ways that are restorative and bring people forward and let them live, you know, thrive and flourish in their lives. And our intention is to build this, Lucy. So absolutely, our social care teams and how they, particularly in the early stages of, you know, issue and before assessments, to be able to share some of that information, so we're able to point them into the right direction around preventative measures locally, rather than going into formal assessment, has to be part of the picture. And some of our also work we're doing around understanding our single view of vulnerable customers. We've done some assessment, all the interfaces of individuals into our systems, things like, you know, food parcels and asking for welfare support, or coming to housing benefits, or going through Derby Direct, or a whole range of doors they come through, and we don't join that information up. And we miss the chance to really actually support people effectively. So it's quite a big transformation. We're doing it step by step, and that's important. But the intention longer term is to absolutely join as much as we legally can up at a local level to really help people, you know, live effective lives.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. Maria?
Yeah, I just want to give a quick reassurance, really. The information governance point that Jen raised is really, really important, but we have to find a way forward. But where we're talking about sharing data, it's not personal case data that's being shared. The things that we're talking about here are particular hotspots where we're getting high levels of antisocial behaviour, where we're getting high levels of debt, where we're getting high levels of fly tipping, all of these kind of issues that are logged on different systems within the council family. What we're not talking about is personal case files that might be held within various departments. So it's different layers of information governance that we're going through. And really interesting piece of work that we're looking at is some case studies of customers that contacted us through the community hub in COVID. And again, without looking at their individual case details, what we are doing is sharing information at a very high level, which is all around looking at where services duplicate each other. Because I personally think nothing must be more frustrating for a customer when you've got 2 or 3 different services all knocking on your door, when there's probably a lot of duplication going on. So it's very high level, Jen. And wherever we go, there will have to be a lot of security and different levels of access to information, because only certain people need to see certain things.
Could I come back very quickly? So just to say that, 2 points. I totally get what you're saying about it, maybe like not relevant personal data, but from the perspective of somebody living in a household on a street in that kind of area, there is still a huge amount of insight that can be gained even from unpersonal data. And if you're in a situation where there's a perception that Derby Homes or the council are kind of spying on you, even if from a governance perspective we're not actually using personal data in the definition of legislation, it can still damage relationships. And actually there's a thing about communication with tenants here, and I think it's really important that when we're doing work like this, wherever we're at, you know, in a big organisation or an institution, people a lot of the time can think that, yes, they are helping, and often they can. But if we're not looking at the ethics and approach that we're using, there is always a danger that we become paternalistic and help people in a way that actually we think they need to be helped, rather than in a way that they want to be helped. And this brings us back to the co-production stuff. So it's just... It's that relationship with our tenants that I'm talking about, not how we use the data. Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head and described everything that we need to move away from.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. If there's nothing else, thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you.
Moving on to a 8 health and safety update. Sean, are you going to lead on this one?
Yes, thanks, Mike. Yeah, we had a fairly well attended and lively health and safety forum meeting this afternoon at 3 o'clock, and we went through the accident and incident trends, and there's nothing major for us to report up to board in relation to that tonight. We also looked through the violence and aggression reports, and we did spend quite a bit of time talking about an incident where an operative had been punched in the ribs by someone that lived next door to the property that it was attending. And whilst that is absolutely a police matter and the police are dealing with it, we agreed that we'd raise the speed at which the police are dealing with that incident at our strategic meetings with them as we move forward. There's been a few occurrences where, you know, we're feeling as though, you know, maybe a swifter response and approach, you know, could have potentially helped. We're doing all we can to support our employee through that process, and Nick and Joe are going to pick the issue up at their strategic meetings with the police. So we did have a detailed conversation about that particular incident. We also talked about COVID-19 and the return to hybrid working and how that's settling in across the organisation. We had some really positive feedback from the customer services team, who previously to COVID were operating from quite a long, narrow office just behind the reception block. We've relocated them to a nice big airy space within the mill, and that's gone down very well, and it's very positive. However, as a result of them working over from the mill, they've identified some issues with some smells coming from the toilets, and we agreed that we'd look at the ventilation and issues there. So we come up with a few ideas about potentially resolve that. I'm not going to give you all of the detail.
You've verged on too much information.
I'm not going to give you too much information, but suffice to say that we take all these matters seriously, and we are looking to implement a solution and resolve that. We also talked today about the delay in the Grenfell Phase 1 recommendations being put the system be laid to Parliament by the Home Office, and that we're watching those recommendations very closely, and confirm that we've already had joint meetings with the Derbyshire Fire and Rescue Service in order to make sure that we're absolutely tuned into any changes coming down the track in relation to those recommendations coming through. And we also heard today some really good news about the fact that we'd completed the renewal of the CCTV system to Milestone House. And over 90 cameras, 96 cameras in fact in total, have been installed at Milestone House now, so every nook and cranny. And just to show you, I've got a bit of a photo here of mission control. That just gives you an idea there of facility now what's at Milestone House. 96 cameras, every nook and cranny. I'm sorry I didn't have that for the meeting this afternoon, Ian. Chris Clark sent it through to me after the meeting, but it gives you an idea of, you know, how serious we take health and safety, in particular, you know, in that building and on the staff there. And, you know, every meeting we do have a topic where we talk about that. Yeah, I think it was a good meeting. Have I missed anything, Ian?
No, I think that was an excellent summary, Sean. I couldn't better that at all.
Thank you. Yeah, Jean?
It's not really kind of like on health and safety as such, but obviously we have the updates from on health and safety because of our legal responsibility as board members. I chaired the Equalities Forum, and I'm wondering whether we should be getting the sort of an update from that at these meetings as well, because I feel it's something that is kind of like so crucial as for us all as board members to understand some of the issues that are sort of being raised at that forum as well.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. We can action that in future. Yeah, thank you. Lucy?
Thank you. I was just wondering, picking up on the absenteeism, of which quite a lot is still related to COVID, and I just wondered how much of that is long COVID and people who are clear of their week, fortnights of being ill, but are still actually drained and washed out and not able to get back full time.
Do you know that?
I don't know that detail, but Taryn might be able to help with that. I know that we had a look at some of the stats this morning. Sorry to put this one on you, mate, but whether or not you've got a bit of detail, I'm not aware that there's too many that are long COVID on the numbers that we've got. From the reflection, I can see whether there isn't. Is there? Is that correct, Taryn? Am I right in that assumption?
We are following national trends. Our biggest reason for absenteeism is mental health, anxiety, and stress, which the HSE have just released something recently saying that across the country is the biggest reason. We do have all the COVID stats, don't have them to hand, but our teams do know who's off, what they're off for, and they analyse that data. But for Derby Homes, like national, it is mental health, anxiety, and stress was our biggest reason for absenteeism.
So what are we doing to address that if we know it's the challenge?
Do you want me to take that one?
Yes, please, Mira.
We only actually discussed that this morning, Lucy, because it is a significant priority. What we are doing is lots and lots of very good work, but work that happens reactively when somebody actually goes off. What is frustrating, or personally frustrating for me, is we do have excellent support in place for staff that if they are suffering from any problems that may result in poor mental health in the longer term, they can use workplace wellness. But very, very few employees use that facility, which is frustrating. So this morning we agreed that we're going to ask colleagues from the organisation to come in and talk to our next managers networking session about two things. One, what can you do to be a little bit more proactive and prevent people's mental health deteriorating? But secondly, as well, we're acutely aware that some of our managers are managing some exceptionally difficult circumstances that employees find themselves in. And we're not qualified. And I think it's actually, it's very stressful for managers as well. So we're going to request further support from Workplace Wellness for our managers who are managing a small number, but really, really significant problems with some employees. And certainly today, the whole of senior management team were all in absolute agreement that it is much better to prevent an absence than treat one once it occurs.
Absolutely.
So that is absolutely our focus. But we have already got things in place, but worryingly, the numbers of staff that report in with short and long-term absences for this reason aren't accessing the system. And that's something that we need to understand.
Yep. Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking here, trying to think outside the box. is it possible it's to do with perception and suspicion that, you know, if I go and see somebody with wellness and I go and take up the offer, that it's going to work against me? And I think that's probably part of it, you know, that magic word, perception is reality, reality is perception. And this may well be, well, I don't want to go down that route. And this could further exasperate the situation. And you're absolutely right. Prevention in every case is better than cure. And I speak from personal experience, that is certainly the way forward, but it doesn't always happen for various reasons.
Yeah, we keep sending the message out, Bob, because obviously we want to resolve problems, not take negative action against individuals that are already struggling. And on the amount of times that we do have to take action under the attendance policy, it's very, very low. But as I said, my biggest desire here is to prevent rather than treat.
You know, they say it's good to talk.
Yeah, but it's good to talk to the right people, isn't it, as well?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. Right. If that's it on there, we move on then to A9. Michael, HRA business plan, rents.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is the annual report, which the council asked for Derby Homes to undertake a consultation exercise on their annual HRA business plan and their proposed rent and service charge increases. The proposal is likely to go to January Cabinet, and this process, what we're doing now, will feed into that that Cabinet report. The council are looking to maintain the business as usual approach, really, in setting rents in line with the regulators' recommended levels as per the rent standard. And those levels of increases for next year are based on the CPI rate plus 1%, which would be a total of 4.1% on the rent, and the service charges to increase in line with the retail price index, which for September was 4.9%. And there's some variances on service charges for certain services like grounds maintenance and cleaning, because the cost of those services is still in excess of the income generated on them. And there's separate proposed freeze again on the furniture pack charges. We have consulted with both the DACP and the Customer Voice last week, and their reactions and their comments were really positive, actually. The rents, even after this increase, would still be around, well, actually below 60% of market rents. So feedback from those groups was that the rent was actually seen as value for money, and it's more of a challenge around ensuring that our services are fit for purpose and are good, rather than the actual level of the rent and the service charges that are being charged. So we'll be feeding those consultation replies back to the council, and that's going to go into the Cabinet report. But the first recommendation that we're looking to get support on is for the board to support the council's recommendations in adopting the regulators' recommended increases on rents and service charges for next year. So happy to take any questions on that recommendation to start with.
I think it's fair and just. Yeah, I think having done the consultations and getting the response that you have, then I think that would go along with that.
Thank you. And then the second and third, the second recommendation is for Derby Homes to follow the council's lead, if you like, in terms of the increases on its own property rents and service charges. That goes, those increases apply from August, but looking again at the same type of increases on rents and service charges for the 110 or so Derby Homes owned properties. So just any comments on the Derby Homes property recommendation?
Again, I think looking at our customers, they don't care whether it's a Derby Homes house or a city council house, and it would be wrong to charge different rents.
Yeah. Okay. And I think that covers the third one as well in terms of applying that increase from August.
Okay. Do we approve those recommendations that Michael's laid out?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Moving on then to item A.
Oh, sorry, Lucy.
Oh, sorry, Lucy. Muted, Lucy.
Oh dear. Sorry, I want to raise something under this, which is looking a bit further ahead, because the guidance we're following at the moment, I think we've got 1 year to run, and then we will presumably get some different guidance or same guidance or similar guidance from the government as to what we should be doing next. And it therefore seems to me to be a good time to feed in a suggestion as to what that guidance might include. Now, one of the things that we've been working on really hard here, as we all know, is to improve the energy efficiency of our properties and to provide PVs on roofs, which give a direct benefit to the tenants as far as practical. I want to do more of it. So we may have 2 otherwise identical properties, 3-bedroomed homes, one of which might cost £10 a week less to live in than the other because of the energy efficiency and the PVs that we've been able to install. But yet we can't reflect that in the rent, although we've got one household there who are better off. Now, if we were able to do that and to put an increase in rent, not of the full 10% nominal that I'm talking about, but a proportion of that into the system, we would have more opportunity to be able to improve homes so that there would be more tenants who could benefit. Now, I would think this would be a useful thing, not just for ourselves, but across the country, to incentivize people, social housing providers, Almos and others, to actually invest more in dealing with energy inefficient homes. And I just wonder if there's a mechanism by which we could feed that back into the system and suggest it's something that we should pass, or the council should pass upwards as something to think about for the future.
Michael, do you want to come?
Yeah, I can give you an update on that one. Firstly, the rent standard's actually in place till 2024, 2025. So the recommendation for the rent will be CPI plus 1% until at least then.
So it's 2 years.
Yeah, what happens after that, we would love to know, because it would give a lot more certainty to our HRA business plan setting. And I think you're absolutely right to raise the energy example of how that's going to feed into future rent setting, because we all know that the decarbonisation costs in the future for all councils will be way in excess of what the HRA business plans can afford. And one way of bridging that affordability gap is to continue with rent increases above levels of inflation. Governments will be factoring that in. Separately to that, you raise a really good point about the differential in running costs of properties between those that have had that significant decarbonisation investment and those that still haven't had that. Now, there are examples in other countries, in Holland in particular, of there being like a service charge premium for those properties that have had those works done. Now, that service charge would not be eligible for housing benefit or universal credit, because obviously heating costs are not covered by housing benefit or universal credit anyway. So, not wishing to put my neck on the line, but I would anticipate in the future there being some recognition in the form of a service charge rather than being a rent add-on, because from a national perspective, if it was a rent add-on specifically for this, then you would find in like Derby's case, nearly 2/3 of it being covered by housing benefit and universal credit. And I think from a national perspective, that would be incredibly costly. But I think that as part of that sharing the cost going forward, we may find that the benefits of the improved homes, there will be a looking to get a contribution back by a form of a service charge. But obviously, this is the sort of thing that all the trade organisations are lobbying governments on at the minute. And I know that David's involved. This is part of the stuff that David's still doing as part of the NFA and as part of SITFA and other organisations as well, looking at options to fund this for the long term.
Is it something that there is a route for Derby Homes to feed that suggestion back to the council and the council to pick that up as a recommendation from its Elmo?
Yeah, well, just on that, Lucy, I think we'll be picking that up as part of the work that I'm doing through the Housing Action Hub, because we're going to have to consider innovative ways of being able to fund those sort of improvements moving forward, and that will include contributions from those that are benefiting from the work. Nottingham have done a bit of this, and they call it a comfort charge with some of the properties that they've done the whole house retrofit to. For us in the city, you know, we've done a lot of this work, but so far I've not charged tenants for the benefit of those improvements. In fact, there is a view where you can see that tenants don't always receive the full financial saving that would anticipate from the measure, but actually take it an extra heat, and they're able to heat an extra room, because, you know, it's tough out there, isn't it? So, you know, we've always been a bit resistant to wanting to levy any sort of charge or fee, but that is probably going to have to change in the future.
So could we do that as a comfort charge, as a service charge, without a change in the regulations?
The council could make a decision to add on an extra service charge if it wanted to do so, but I suspect it would be wise to wait to see what the national position is going to be, so there's more consistency on how that will be applied going forward.
Right. My view is that if we were to introduce something like that, it should be introduced progressively, so that it makes a small impact initially, but it grows as a percentage over a number of years. Because otherwise, I think, you know, step changes aren't good.
No, and I think we've got a challenge in terms of the headroom that we got as well from rents and the cap as well. That was a bit of a challenge in terms of how much we could levy at one particular time. But it's a crazy one, isn't it, really? You know, we finished the last few properties off, and so far 95% of homes have received the benefits and not paid any extra. It would feel a little bit wrong if the final few that are having this work done, you know, just by the matter of timing, you know, have to contribute something towards that work. So it's wrestling with that dilemma as well, which is scary thing.
It should be done on the energy efficiency of the home and the presence or otherwise of PVs, not on the timing of the work.
Okay. Yeah.
And I take Lucy's point about different houses and different rent. I pay the same rent as the person next door, but they've got the benefit of solar panels, etc., on the roof. So I think the idea of an add-on charge is better than a rent charge, because I'd be quite angry if I was paying the same rent as the person next door and they're getting the benefits of all this, and I'm next door paying the same rent. So Michael's right. I think it needs to be an add-on as opposed to a rent. And, you know, I would willingly have my house brought up to date tomorrow. I would love it.
I think it's not really the right time to have the discussion, but just as we're having it, I'll just add my point of view. Just to say that we also don't want people to feel that they don't want to have any of the this work done either, and that if potentially if there's a cost, people might start refusing work as well. So that needs to be thought about as well.
That's a good point. I think, pick up what you say, Lucy, you've introduced a very important topic that will need a lot of discussion around this table at the council and in various other places.
It's a national issue as well.
But directly, yes, we are in a position, if we are going to make a recommendation, there are a number of avenues that we can bring that forward, including through the council and ourselves through the NFA and various other areas. But I think it is a discussion that we need to have, because it sounds like a good idea, but we've got to be aware of unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's something that needs to be introduced sensitively and carefully.
Yes. Okay. Right. Thank you for that, Lucy. If we can then move on to item 8.10, which is the board member appraisals. This is something, as it says here, that we did to comply with the National House Federation Code of Governance. However, we don't just want it to be an exercise for ticking a box. And the important thing is, what do we do having done it? And I think that brings us on to the comments that we raised, particularly in 4.7. What could the board do better? That if we're going to make this a meaningful exercise, we need to look at the comments that people have raised and what we can do to make things better. So it could be, what I'd suggest is that this is something we ought to return to. We've seen these comments here. and to see exactly what are we doing about it in these there. Particularly, I would like to think number 3, meetings go on far too long. Some of the things that we as board members individually need to look at is our own behaviour. The only reason why board meetings go on too long is that we talk too much.
But you need some of
that's just what I was going to say. They are only too long if what we talk about is not relevant. Or can't be dealt with in any particular way. I don't argue against good discussions like we've just been having there, which wouldn't necessarily be picked up, but is a valuable discussion for this board to have had. What I do mean is for minor points and things which could be dealt with in emails and direct questions, things like that, rather than a discussion around there. But I think if we can agree that we will come back in, say, about 6 months to look at these again and see, actually, are we doing things any better?
That's a fair point, I think.
Good. I think it would be really useful to have some time, such as like we had at the away day, where we kind of look at as a group, because obviously these were all things that we said sort of individually, but maybe as a group, kind of like, because we have to review our effectiveness as a board as well, don't we?
Yes.
So it can kind of like be part of that, but I really feel that it would be good as a group and agree to come back to it.
Yeah. Any further comments on this one? Can we agree that I think what Jan said is the right way forward, because we may not all agree with all the comments that have been put in here.
I'm sure we don't.
And we may have other points to make. Okay, right, thank you, Jan. Then we go on to A11, board members' declaration of interest. Taryn?
Thank you. This is the report on the board members' declaration of interest. The report provides board members have declared interest in accordance with our memorandums and articles of association and Competence Act. The recommendation is to note the declarations of interest of board members. I don't propose to go through the individual declarations of interest. They are recorded. But what I would like to remind board members is if anything changes throughout the year, please let us know so we can update those declarations. And obviously at the beginning of each board meeting, you have the declaration. So if there is anything, there's that opportunity to do declare. Yes, sir.
Okay, right. Thank you, Karen. A12 then, audit committee recommendations. Ian touched on this initially, but Michael, are you going to?
Yes, I'll take this one. 4 policies were approved by the audit committee back at October's meeting, and the board is just asked to recommend approval of those 4 policies, and just happy to take any questions arising on those policies.
Ian, do you wish to add anything further than what you said?
Not really, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, do we agree those recommendations as come from the audit committee? Right, thank you very much. Very similarly, moving on to the governance committee recommendations again, which Jan touched on at the beginning.
Thank you. This report presents a number of policies that we recommended that were recommended for approval by the governance committee on the 4th of November, namely the board member code of conduct 2021 to 24 and the board member services agreement 2021 to 24. There only minor changes were made, and they related to bringing it up to date, making sure that it was gender neutral, inclusive to non-binary pronouns, and just remove the influence of paperwork to documents. So we're looking forward to going digital. So there is, so the recommendation is to approve those that have already been discussed at the governance committee and has been seen by all board members.
Jan, do you want to add anything? Okay. Okay, can we approve those? Agree. Thank you. A14 is just for noting the forward plan of agenda items, and A15, as usual, there are no new disclosures under the Insurance Act. So that ends the open part of the meeting. I want to look at B1 to consider the resolution to exclude members of the public and to obviously Rachel and Roy, we will hopefully agree, can stay in the meeting, but to ask Josh if you could then end